Hello everyone, and welcome to my second tutorial video. In this video I'm going to be showing you how to use the TJC Summer Project Club's QuickTime event system that we developed over the course of a few weeks, meeting a couple hours a week. And this was developed completely from scratch at TJC, and it's a neat little system. It's fun and it's easy to use. And it's really quite powerful as well, as you should see here shortly. So you can see I've already got the UDK editor open. As usual, I'm working on dual screens. So for instance, if I hit the content browser, you're not going to see the content browser pop up. I'm just going to have to drag it over from the other screen and let you see it like that, just so that you're aware of that before we move any further. I'm going to go ahead and make this window nice and big because I'm not going to be using those other perspectives. I've got a very simple level here that I created in the editor. It's a 1024 by 1024 by 1024 cube with a player start location and a nice big trigger that's hard to avoid and adequate lighting. If I open my Kismet, all that you'll see in there currently, oops, sorry about that. All that you'll see in there currently is the touch trigger. Okay, there's nothing odd going on here, nothing strange. Okay. And we're just about to set up our QuickTime event, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to make this QuickTime event happen whenever somebody steps on this particular trigger. You could set your QuickTime event up to be triggered on just about anything that you would like. It's just easiest to set it up with a trigger in the beginning, and so that's what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to right-click in an empty space. I'm going to go to New Action, and I'm going to look for the category called Scheduling. There's two items under Scheduling here, one called Schedule Event and one called Toggle QTE State. We're going to deal with Toggle QTE State a little bit later on. Right now I just want to deal with Schedule Event. If you've ever used remote events in Kismet, this is extremely similar. It's just a little bit more versatile, and it's got some code in it specific for dealing with QuickTime events, as you're about to see. Now, in order to make this event be scheduled as soon as somebody steps on the trigger, I'm just going to connect my touched over to my N. Very simple. Next thing I have to do is I need to tell my event who this QuickTime event is going to apply to. It is possible using this system to make QuickTime events for multiplayer, and you can involve several players in a QuickTime event. You can involve just one player in the QuickTime event. You can have the other players in other QuickTime events or not in a QuickTime event at all. It's really very versatile that way, and I'd love to see somebody work with some applications in multiplayer to see that happen, but we're not going to do that here. We're just going to do a very simple example, and I'll show you some of the more advanced functionality in some of the later tutorial videos. So I'm just going to right click and I'm going to go to New Variable, Player. As usual, when you add a player variable to Kismet, it assumes that you want to use all players. We want to turn that off so that we're only affecting the player who actually stepped on that trigger. The way that we indicate that that's the player that we want to use is we connect the instigator, who is the person who stepped on that, into this particular variable, and that will populate this variable. That then becomes the input into our schedule event. Now you can see that there's several variables here. These variables are in case you're working in a system that needs to respond to what's ever happening currently in game. That's not usually the case with a QuickTime event. Usually with a QuickTime event, the player steps at a certain location, which would be marked with a trigger, and the QuickTime event just starts. It doesn't need to look at anything else going on in the game in order to do what it's trying to do, except for maybe the difficulty level or something like that, so it can speed up the QuickTime events. However, if you've played a lot of games, you know that QuickTime events in a lot of games are independent of even of difficulty. They don't change their timing. So true to form, we're not going to use these as variables. I'm just going to click here and I'm going to enter these as constants here because it's a little bit easier, and I also don't have a lot of bubbles floating around cluttering up my Kismet space. So the first thing I have to do is I have to give this a name. I'm going to go ahead and name it QTE for QuickTime Event Test. That name is important. It will be matched to an event later on, so make sure that you're aware that you will be using that again. Don't just leave it blank. It is very important that you put something in there. The delay is how long we want to wait from when we step on this trigger until the event actually triggers. Now, for a QuickTime event, this is almost always going to be 0. But this system was made so that we could schedule all sorts of events. Like you might want to schedule, I don't know, somebody dying in 5 minutes. You might set up a timer for them to die in 5 minutes or something like that, in which case you might want to use duration or delay. But we're not going to be using it here. We're not going to be using it in any of these tutorials. So, but it is there in case you want it. And all that it would do is introduce this many seconds of delay until this guy started. Okay, so let's go ahead and go down to duration. Duration is very important. I'm going to set this to be 5 seconds. Duration is the length of the QuickTime event. Normally with a QuickTime event, what you have is somebody steps on a trigger or something like that. Some animation or cinematic happens. And towards the end of that time, they're expected to press a key. And if they press that key without pressing any other key before it, that's considered a success. And if they don't press any key, or if they press a wrong key before they press the correct key, then they failed it. And that's why we have a duration, which will normally be the length of your animation sequence. And I'll show you more about that in a later video as well. And then we also have a success time, which is the amount of time at the end of the duration during which you can press the key. I'm going to set this to be 2 seconds, which is an exceptionally easy QuickTime event. Just for our demonstration purposes here. So that means that this is going to start immediately because the delay is set to 0. During the first 3 seconds is just going to be some animation time. You can't really do anything during that time, but during the last 2 seconds, so after the 3 seconds, there's another 2 seconds during which you can press the key in order to succeed. Now things get a little bit more complicated after these first couple of variables. And the reason for that is because I wanted to add a lot of power for what we're calling multi-QuickTime events. And I'll show you those in a later tutorial as well. But right now we just want to use the absolute most basic functionality. So I'm not going to get into that just yet. So that means I only need to add one of each of these items where I have room for a whole list. The items are key codes, which is the code that you're going to enter for the key that needs to be pressed. The prompt material, which is the material that's going to show up in 2D on the screen telling them what to press. And the success material, which is a feedback material to show them that they have in fact pressed the right key. So let's go ahead and add our first key code. Key codes are strings, and they're just whatever the code is for the key that was just pressed. Currently in our system, all that we support is the up arrow, the down arrow, the left arrow, and the right arrow, although we're going to add support at least for WASD and spacebar later on. We haven't done that just yet. We only have, again, those 4 arrow keys, and the codes for those are up, down, left, and right. So let's just go ahead and type up here, which means that in order to pass this QuickTime event, we want to press the up arrow. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add my prompt material. And this is an actual material. If you watched my previous video, you'll see that we introduced a system that allows you to display 2D images, hide 2D images, and all that kind of stuff on your HUD. All of that is actually done for you inside of this node. So you don't have to worry about adding it to the list and displaying it, toggling it, and all that. This will take care of all of the timing for all of that for you. But I do need to find the material. So I'm going to open my content browser, and I'll drag it over here where you can see it. I'm going to do a search on up arrow, and you should see, oh, I'll hit all assets. There we go. You should see the materials here that I've made for this. If you haven't downloaded the code, then you don't have these, but you'll have to use something else. So, and I'm just going to filter out just materials, so I hide those two textures, and I only have the materials. Now my prompt material is going to be this red arrow pointing up to prompt the user that they need to press the up key. So I'll just select that there, press the green arrow here, and that'll fill in that material right there. The success material is going to be this goldish colored up arrow to indicate that they have in fact pressed the up key and they have succeeded. So I've got it selected there, and I'm just going to scroll down, and I'm going to hit my green arrow, and there we go. There's the success material. Very simple stuff again. All right, so I'm done with the content browser now. I'm just going to go ahead and close that and get it out of my way. Image width and image height should be pretty self-explanatory. That's how big it's going to appear on the screen in pixels. Now these are materials, so they can be stretched, they can be shrunk, they can be rotated. You can do all sorts of things to them. When I drew these in GIMP, I made them 64 by 64, so I'm just going to go ahead and make them 64 by 64 now as well. XGAP is what's going to be used if you have multiple images on screen at the same time. That's for a more advanced type of QuickTime event called a multi-QuickTime event that I'll introduce to you in a later video. So we're just going to leave that at 0 for now because we're not going to use that at all. Same thing with randomize and sequence size. Leave sequence size at 1. That's for multi-QuickTime events, and we don't want to mess with that just yet. Okay. Now that's a lot of explanation for really very little stuff that we actually put in there, and unfortunately we have a whole nother node to put in before we can make this thing really do anything. So let's go ahead and do that now. Let's just right click and we'll go to new event this time, not new action but new event, because this is a QuickTime event. Go down to scheduling again and you'll see there's only one item in there, and that's our scheduled event. What's going to happen is, after delay amount of time, it's going to fire this particular scheduled event. In order to marry this scheduled event to this particular scheduled event, we have to make sure that the object name is the same. Again, here it was QTE test, so here I'm going to type in QTE test as well, and that's going to be my only input for the scheduled event. Now I've got several outputs here. I've got what I want to do when the QuickTime event starts, when it ends, when the success window opens, when I succeed, and when I fail. And we'll save those for the next tutorial because I'm just about out of time here. And let's just go ahead and close Kismet and test. And there we go. There's my up arrow. I actually failed that time. That's why it didn't change. I didn't press it in time. But I didn't have anything in my on failure, and that's why you didn't see anything actually happen. Let's just walk in there again and fire that thing again. For the last 2 seconds of the window, well, that's not working either. We'll have to deal with that in the second tutorial because I am out of time now. So thank you for watching, and I hope you're around for part 2.